Hello everybody! Man, has it been a couple of weeks since my last video, but I'm not a fan of rushing videos out and I wanted to spend a little bit of time getting a complete Zenyatta guide out for all of you. I'll be going over positioning, aiming techniques, crosshairs that I use, sensitivity, character matchups, and did I mention positioning? Because yeah! Oh, and I forgot to mention that we're going to be going over my favorite spots for a couple of maps. So buckle your butts in, grab some popcorn, and if you need to skip to a specific section, the timestamps will be in the comments waiting for your wonderful face cheeks. So, aiming techniques. Is there a best way to aim with Zen? Well, yeah, I think objectively there are aiming styles that are way more effective on certain characters than others. To some degree, you'll use elements of both flicking and tracking on Zen, and if I had to boil it down to one concrete technique, it would be tracking in the sense of predicting where your opponent is going to move, and then making adjustments as needed, which is still basically flicking, I guess, so f me. In regards to right-clicking, most of the time you really are just predicting where your opponent is going to move and then aiming ahead of them. If an opponent is low and there's a health pack nearby, you know they're probably about to plant their butt cheeks as hard as they can on that sweet, sweet health. I go back and forth between a short crosshair and a dot, and I found benefits to using both. I find I'm able to hit headshots easier with a dot crosshair because I feel like I'm being more precise at every range. However, I do find I have some difficulty tracking or flicking sometimes because the crosshair isn't giving me horizontal or vertical reference. At the end of the day, it really does boil down to what you're comfortable with, and color doesn't really matter as long as you can still distinguish your crosshair and it doesn't get lost in the middle of a team fight. If you do struggle with losing track of where your crosshair is, I recommend either adjusting your outline opacity or adjusting the size of your crosshair. Or you can just turn your monitor off too, I guess, and that solves all of your problems. Sensitivity is another big question I see in the comment section for Zen players. Do I go with a higher sensitivity or a lower sensitivity like the infamous Jonak? I'd say a good starting point is to try out the PSA method. I'll leave the links in the description for you to find an approximate perfect sensitivity for you. The calculator helps you determine the ideal sensitivity for your playstyle. If you are interested in learning about the PSA method, KarQ covers everything you really need to know in like 4 minutes. And I'll leave that link to his video in the description also. There are a lot of YouTubers that have videos on this subject, but most of them are over like 10 minutes long and are really dragged out. Like, come on, dudes, is ad revenue that important to you that you have to waste the time of viewers? Although I can't talk because this video is going to be longer than my, which isn't that hard. Wait, did I just hit 2 joke birds with 1 joke rock? Is that a thing? Oh, I'm so lonely. I personally played on a 5 sensitivity and 800 DPI for a while, but that was mostly because I had a really tiny mouse pad, and I found I was having issues micro-adjusting and hitting targets, so I used the PSA method and landed at a 3.18 sensitivity at 800 DPI, and I've pretty much stuck with this for the past few months. However, I now have a very large mouse pad, like I'm talking full desk size that I purchased on Amazon. I'll leave the link to this behemoth in the description as well, because why the not? And I wouldn't recommend using a super low sensitivity if you have a small mouse pad or not a lot of desk space. There are obviously advantages to both. Lower sensitivity gives you more micro adjustment ability and precision when aiming, but 180s aren't as easy and targets that are moving rapidly around you might be too much to handle. A higher sensitivity definitely allows you to react to flankers easier, but it also means that your precision may take some time to develop. Even if you can react quickly to flankers, if you can't hit them, a higher sensitivity isn't going to do you much good. But again, at the end of the day, it is personal preference, and just make sure you stick to one sensitivity for long periods of time instead of constantly switching. So let's move on to how to play Zen, and how to get the most value out of him. In regards to right-clicking, I personally find myself using right-click way more than I probably should sometimes, but in all fairness, if my teammates are at full health and I don't have my ultimate, the thing I'm prioritizing is building ult charge. Most of the time, it's just pure prediction anyway, but sending a volley of Zen balls down a sightline may also reward you with an early kill. The best Tracer and Genjis will try to bait your right click out, so in most cases, if you don't have the time to charge it up, you should be left clicking. If the fight hasn't broken out yet, right click away. It really comes down to instinct, and I've spent countless hours watching Jonak, Unko, and Custa to try and figure out if there's a set pattern as to the best times to left versus right click during a team fight. And one of the patterns I actually picked up on was that if they had cover to play around, regardless of if they were actively being threatened, they tended to favor a right-click engagement and then a left-click follow-up to secure damage or a kill. And don't forget that you do have Discord Orb to help track the enemy position, which works wonders when lining up a right-click from around a corner or doorway. Speaking of Discord Orb, in case you didn't know, enemies take 30% more damage from all sources. Just keep in mind that both your healing and Discord Orbs will reset if the person they are on leaves your line of sight after 3 seconds. Using the same concept as your healing orb, you'll want to Discord aggressive enemy players, or if you can manage to Discord a key target like a healer, calling them out for your team to focus. However, if your team doesn't have anyone to flank around the target or backline, you'll just want to try and get a Discord on the enemy main tank so you can burn them down and collapse on the rest of their team. And of course, Discording flankers will always help take care of them. Even the threat of a Discord orb is enough to keep flankers from getting too close. Especially if you communicate the flanker's position to mobile teammates and they peel back to help for you. That is the greatest feeling in the world. Now, Zen's healing ability is Harmony Orb, which mechanically functions the exact same way as Discord. Plop it on a target and switch when needed. If you don't have your ult, which, if I can remind you, completely negates most team wiping ultimates, you'll definitely want to prioritize keeping your Harmony Orb on whomever is taking the most damage or is being the most aggressive. If the enemy team is flanking or diving your second support, try and get your healing orb on them before they start taking damage to try and help mitigate the chances of them being taken out. Because as immobile as you are, if your second support or peeler dies, you probably will too. Zen's ultimate is relatively straightforward conceptually in usage. If the enemy uses an ult, you'll have about a second to decide whether or not it's worth trying to save your team. And there are a few reasons why you might hold off on using Transcendence to try and mitigate all the damage coming towards your team. The major ults you should be looking out for are Genji Blade, Reinhammer, and Zarya's Grav. Of course, you can use it in response to a lot of other ultimates, but these are the ultimates that you'll almost get guaranteed value for every time. But be mindful that a well-placed Anonade can completely shut down the massive amounts of healing you put out during your ultimate. If you have the reaction time, using Transcendence as a Reinhammer's down, a Sombra EMPs, or a Reaper decides to Beyblade your backline, there are definitely times where you can save your team from this inconvenient thing called death. Just be sure to utilize the extra movement speed you gain to reposition yourself in a safe spot just as your ult finishes. And above all, you probably shouldn't use your Zen ult just to save yourself from an enemy flanker. If they're giving you that much trouble, make sure you communicate it with your team. And if they don't respond or tell you to switch, use the constant bombardment of Tracers and Genjis as a learning experience. Take the experience of constantly being dove as a way to learn about where you're positioned, and if that's not a major issue, begin to work on technical ability so you can begin to constantly duel those pesky flankaroos. Now on to positions! Nope, I can see you grinning back there, not those kind of positions. Yikes, I need to be careful around you guys. Let's move on to Zen positioning. Nope, now I just sound way too specific. Rule 34, everyone. Before I get into map-specific locations that I like to use, the most important takeaway is to hug and love corners more than anything else in the world. Sorry, Mom. As Zen, your hitbox is the size of a dump truck, and you lack the mobility to quickly get out of harm's way. So stick to those walls and payloads, boys and girls. You don't want to end up like Mandata. Sound effects, because we don't want to get copyrighted. Blah, no. I won't be going over every single map, but if you are interested in seeing an in-depth look at Zen positioning on every single map, offense and defense, let me know in the comments and I'll do my best to get those videos out, or at least one big video covering every map. For now, I just want to take a look at a handful of my favorite spots. Hanamura has some of the best defensive sightlines in the game for a Zen player. This back corner on point B allows fantastic cover while being able to fire orbs at the point, high ground, flankers from the right, enemy pushes from the center, and in the event you need to rotate or move positions, you have easy access to high ground right up the stairs. You'll also have some space to contest snipers that take the high ground, but note that if the enemy team is fond of going to the left, the position is going to leave you stranded, and you usually won't have enough time to retreat back to spawn for health. Alternatively, if the enemy consistently pushes left, I'll sometimes shift over to this section on the right-hand side, which still keeps the point in view, while still granting me the sights of the main entrance and vision of the top left entrances that were previously in our blind spot. There's also a really nice mega health pack, so you can always retreat to that if you need. And if you do get pressured by an enemy here, it isn't too far for your teammates to peel if needed. On point A, this sightline is incredible, especially for some right-click spam. You have excellent cover and retreat options, including a health pack, and usually if you have an Ana, they will also be positioned here or on the top floor. Just keep in mind that while you have better sightlines on the bottom floor, enemy snipers have a better shot at you from the ledge. At the top, you'll have less of an enemy sightline, but better protection and scouting ability for enemies coming through the window. On Temple of Anubis, you have quite a few options for point B, and it doesn't hurt to be less predictable if the enemy always knows where you're going to be positioned ahead of time. The first spot is simply right out of spawn and offers great corner cover and sightlines. Alternatively is the high ground pillar, which has the best sightline and scouting position. However, you'll definitely be susceptible to enemy snipers and Genji, but if they aren't threatening you, this spot is incredibly valuable. If you do receive a lot of attention, simply drop down to the health pack and shift into a different spot. I do also like the small passage behind point, and while the sightlines aren't fantastic, most enemies don't expect you to be here, and a sudden right click with a Discord orb can catch enemies off guard. Just be aware that if the enemy pushes from your right, at least one person will probably take cover in here, and I usually avoid holding on the right side when I can because of how vulnerable you are with no retreat or additional cover options. But it can work in stalling situations. On point A, there really is only one location that I use, and unfortunately it is a very susceptible location that Genji, Winston, Diva, and Widow are all over. King's Row is one of those maps where every spot with a corner you can probably hold. High ground point A is your safest bet, and you can even rotate from this ledge to either of the windows depending on how the enemy is shifting their push. If I get forced off of high ground, I take almost identical positions on the low ground directly below where the high ground positions were. At the end of King's Row, depending on how far the enemy has pushed the payload, I'll set up camp right around this doorway and flank around to try and get a right click if possible. Alternatively, I'll hold on. Whoa, would you even consider this high ground? Like, middle ground, I guess. It's not the best position to hold considering the enemy can easily flank your right, but it's an unpredictable spot with an easy retreat to the left. If the enemy has pushed farther up, I'll position myself practically on top of the mini health pack corner here, and launch volleys and volleys of Zen balls until I get health or get wiped. I hope you found this guide informative and my face cheeks entertaining enough to keep your face cheeks around. If you are interested in subscribing, I would greatly appreciate it. What tips do you have for people who might want to pick up Zen or improve their current Zen gameplay? I'd love to hear your respectful and constructive thoughts and feedback, even if you are just procrastinating. Yeah, I see you in the back. And if you are procrastinating, just don't forget to do whatever you need to do. Keep those grades up, everyone. I believe in you. If you'd also like to follow my face cheeks on Twitter, the link will be in the description. And lastly, have a fantastic day, everyone.